What if I told you that in the year 2000, a man appeared on internet forums claiming to be a soldier from the year 2036, and that everything he warned us about is starting to come true? What if I told you he posted detailed schematics of a time machine, made predictions that seemed impossible, revealed classified information that nobody should have known, and then vanished without a trace? And what if I told you that 25 years later, we still can't explain who he was or how he knew what he knew? This is not science fiction. This is not a movie plot. This is the story of John Titor, the man who claimed to travel back in time on a military mission and left behind warnings that still haunt the internet today. Warnings about civil war. Warnings about the collapse of society. Warnings about the exact moment when everything would change. And here's what keeps people awake at night. Some of those warnings are starting to look terrifyingly accurate. Before we dive into this rabbit hole together, I need you to do something. Look around you right now. Look at the year on your calendar. Look at the state of the world. And ask yourself this question: what if he was telling the truth? What if someone really did travel back from a devastated future to warn us, and we didn't listen? By the end of this video, you're going to question everything you think you know about time, reality, and the thin line between possible and impossible. So stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see the world forever. It's November 2000. The internet is still young, still wild, still a place where anonymity means something. A user appears on the Time Travel Institute forums, then on the Art Bell forums, posting under different names but always with the same claim: I am a time traveler from the year 2036, and I'm here on a mission. Most people would have laughed it off. Most people would have ignored it. But this was different, because this man didn't just make vague predictions or mystical claims. He provided technical diagrams. He explained the physics of time travel in excruciating detail. He answered hundreds of questions with consistency that seemed impossible to fake. And he told us exactly why he was here. His name, he said, was John Titor. He was born in 1998, which meant he was just a toddler in the year 2000, living somewhere in Florida. But the John Titor writing these posts was 38 years old, a soldier in a fractured American military fighting in a civil war that would tear the country apart. He claimed he'd been sent back in time on a specific mission: to retrieve an IBM 5100 computer from 1975, a machine that contained hidden capabilities that would be crucial for debugging legacy computer systems in his war-torn future. He had stopped in the year 2000, he said, to visit his family, to see his younger self as a child, and to warn anyone who would listen about what was coming. Now I want you to pause for a second and imagine that. Imagine being 2 years old, playing in your backyard, completely unaware that somewhere nearby, your 38-year-old self is sitting at a computer, typing messages to strangers on the internet, trying to warn the world about a future you'll live through. Imagine the weight of knowing what's coming and being powerless to stop it. Imagine looking at your parents, your home, your entire world, knowing that in just a few years, everything will burn. That's the story John Titor told. And here's what makes it absolutely chilling. He provided evidence. The centerpiece of his evidence was the time machine itself. Titor posted detailed photographs and technical schematics of what he called AC-204 temporal displacement unit, a device installed in a 1967 Chevrolet Corvette and later transferred to a 1987 Chevrolet truck. The machine, according to Titor, was based on the work of physicist Frank Tipler and his theory of rotating cylinders that could bend space-time. But Titor's machine used something even more exotic: micro black holes. Two magnetic housings, he explained, contained dual microsingularities that were rotated at incredibly high speeds to create a standard offset Tipler sinusoid, essentially warping space-time around the vehicle and allowing it to move through time. The level of detail was staggering. He described the weight of the unit: approximately 500 pounds. He explained the gravitational field it produced, equivalent to about 2 GS. He talked about the electron injection manifold, the cooling and X-ray venting system, the gravity sensors that locked onto specific gravitational signatures to navigate through time. He even explained the limitations. Each trip could only move through time at about 10 years per hour of travel, meaning a journey from 2036 back to 1975 would take several hours of subjective time for the traveler. He described the visual effects during travel: The appearance of a sphere of light, the distortion of time outside the field, the sensation of intense gravity pulling at your body. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Skeptics immediately pointed out that creating and containing micro black holes would require technology far beyond anything we have today. They said the energy requirements would be astronomical. They said the physics didn't add up. And Titor's response? He agreed with most of their concerns. He admitted the technology seemed impossible by year 2000 standards. But he also made a crucial point. CERN would discover micro black holes during their experiments with the Large Hadron Collider, and that discovery would change everything. Remember, this was November 2000. The Large Hadron Collider wouldn't even begin operations until 2008. Yet Titor specifically mentioned CERN and their future work with microsingularities. And here's the thing that made even hardcore skeptics pause. In 2008, when CERN fired up the Large Hadron Collider, there was genuine scientific discussion about the possibility of creating micro black holes. Scientists debated whether these tiny singularities could be safely produced and studied. It became a real topic of theoretical physics, exactly as Titor had described 8 years earlier. But the IBM 5100 story is where things get truly bizarre. Titor claimed his entire mission revolved around retrieving an IBM 5100 portable computer from 1975. Why? Because he said this particular computer had a hidden feature that IBM never publicly documented: the ability to read and debug code written in older programming languages, specifically APL and BASIC, that would become crucial for fixing legacy systems in his timeline. He said that most of these systems have been destroyed or made obsolete by the year 2036, but certain military and infrastructure programs still relied on them, and they needed the 5100 to keep things running. Here's the problem. In the year 2000, almost nobody knew about this hidden feature of the IBM 5100. It wasn't in the manuals. It wasn't widely discussed. It was an obscure piece of computer history that only a handful of IBM engineers would have known about. Yet Titor described it in specific detail, explaining exactly why that particular model from that particular year was essential to his mission. Then, in 2001, after Titor had already stopped posting, a former IBM engineer named Bob Dupp came forward and confirmed it. He verified that yes, the IBM 5100 did indeed have this hidden capability. Yes, it could translate between different programming languages in ways that weren't publicly documented. Yes, everything Titor had said about the computer was technically accurate. The question everyone asked was, how did Titor know? How did some random person on an internet forum know about an obscure feature of a 25-year-old computer that even most tech experts weren't aware of? The skeptics had answers, of course. They said Titor must have been an IBM insider, someone with access to old engineering documents. They said it was an elaborate hoax by someone with specialized knowledge. They said it proved nothing about time travel. And maybe they're right. Maybe it was just an incredibly well-researched story. But then you look at the predictions, and things get complicated. By the way, I'm curious, what year are you watching this from? Are you watching in 2025, seeing these words fresh? Or are you watching years later, from a future I can't even imagine yet? Drop the year in the comments. Let's see how far this video travels through time. Who knows? Maybe someone from 2036 will watch this and leave a comment telling us we got all wrong. Or maybe, just maybe, they'll tell us we got it exactly right. Now, let's talk about what Titor predicted, because this is where the story transforms from interesting to absolutely haunting. Titor painted a picture of the future that was, by any measure, apocalyptic. He described the Second American Civil War beginning in 2004, starting as sporadic civil unrest and violence that would gradually escalate into full-scale conflict by 2008. This wasn't a war between North and South, he explained, but a war between rural and urban populations, between people who want to preserve individual liberties, and a federal government that had become increasingly authoritarian. He described Waco-type events happening with increasing frequency, cities becoming dangerous zones controlled by militarized police, and the countryside organizing into armed resistance groups. By 2015, according to Titor, This civil war would culminate in a nuclear exchange that would devastate American cities. Russia would launch a strategic strike against the United States, China, and Europe, killing nearly 3 billion people worldwide. The federal government would effectively cease to exist, replaced by a loose confederation of regional governments. Technology would regress. Infrastructure would collapse. The world of 2036, in Titor's telling, was a world of survivors, people rebuilding from the ashes of a civilization that had destroyed itself. Obviously, these specific predictions didn't come true. We didn't have a civil war starting in 2004. We didn't have a nuclear exchange in 2015. The world of 2025 looks nothing like the wasteland Titor described. So clearly he was wrong, right? Clearly. This proves the whole thing was a hoax? Not so fast. Because here's where the theory of world lines comes in. And here's where Titor's story becomes almost impossible to dismiss entirely. Throughout his posts, Titor repeatedly emphasized that he wasn't predicting the future of our timeline. He was describing the history of his timeline. According to his explanation of time travel physics, based on the Everett Wheeler model of quantum mechanics, every time someone travels through time, they shift between parallel world lines, alternate realities that branch off from each other at every decision point, every random quantum event. He explained that his world line and ours were approximately 2% divergent, meaning they were very similar but not identical. What this meant, according to Titor, was that the major events of his timeline would likely happen in ours, but the details might be different. The dates might shift. The exact circumstances might vary. But the broad strokes, the underlying current of history, would remain the same. It's like watching two similar rivers flow down a mountain, he wrote. They might take slightly different paths, but they're both flowing downward, both heading toward the same destination. So let's examine those broad strokes. Let's look at what Titor warned about and compare it to what actually happened in our world. Titor warned about increasing government surveillance and erosion of civil liberties following a major terrorist attack. Remember, this was November 2000, nearly a year before September 11th, 2001. He talked about the government using fear to justify unprecedented intrusions into private life. He mentioned that people would willingly give up their freedoms in exchange for promise of security, and that by the time they realized what they'd lost, it would be too late to get it back. Then 9/11 happened. The Patriot Act passed. NSA surveillance programs expanded to monitor virtually all electronic communications. TSA checkpoints became permanent fixtures of American life. Warrantless wiretapping, extraordinary rendition, Guantanamo Bay. Everything Titor warned about regarding the security state came true, just not in exactly the way he described. Titor warned about extreme political polarization, about Americans viewing their political opponents not as fellow citizens with different opinions, but as enemies to be destroyed. He described a country where dialogue had become impossible, where every issue was weaponized, where compromise was seen as betrayal. He said this polarization would eventually tear the country apart, would lead to violence, would make civil war inevitable. Look around today. Look at the political landscape of the 2020s. Look at January 6, 2021. Look at the rhetoric on both sides, the dehumanization, the inability to have conversations across ideological lines. Look at how Americans increasingly live in separate information bubbles, consuming completely different narratives about reality itself. We haven't had the civil war Titor described. Not yet, not in the form he predicted. But can anyone honestly say we're not seeing the conditions he warned about? Titor warned about mad cow disease becoming a major crisis, affecting far more people than authorities would initially admit. In the early 2000s, mad cow disease had become a significant issue, leading to massive beef recalls and changes in food safety regulations. He warned about the instability of the Middle East leading to prolonged conflicts. We got Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, 2 decades of continuous warfare. He warned about China's growing military power and increasingly aggressive posture. Look at the last 5 years of Chinese expansion in the South China Sea, the threats against Taiwan, the new Cold War forming between Beijing and Washington. He even warned, in one particularly chilling post, about the breakdown of the power grid and supply chains, about how fragile modern society really was, about how quickly everything could collapse if the systems we depend on failed. Then, In 2021, we watched supply chains disintegrate during the pandemic. We saw empty store shelves. We experienced rolling blackouts and infrastructure failures. We learned exactly how dependent we are on systems we barely understand. None of these things happened exactly as Titor described. The dates were wrong. The details were different. But the themes, the underlying patterns, the trajectory of history, all of that feels uncomfortably accurate. It's like he was reading from a script that we're still following, just with different actors and slightly different stage directions. And that raises the most disturbing question of all. If Titor really did come from a parallel timeline, if he really was trying to warn us, does the fact that we avoided his exact predictions mean we succeeded in changing course? Or does it just mean we're on a slightly different path to the same destination? Let me tell you about one of the most unsettling aspects of the Titor story, something that doesn't get talked about enough. His description of how the Civil War actually started. According to Titor, it didn't begin with a single dramatic event. No Fort Summer moment, no clear declaration of hostilities. Instead, it started with what he called Waco-type events. Government crackdowns on communities and individuals that were perceived as threats. Each incident would be justified, explained away, presented as necessary for public safety. Each time, people would argue about whether the government's response was appropriate or excessive. Each time, the country would become a little more divided, a little more angry, a little more convinced that the other side was the enemy. The violence would start small. Protests turning into riots. Riots turning into armed confrontations. Armed confrontations turning into organized resistance. By the time anyone realized they were in a civil war, it would already be too late to stop it. The descent would be gradual, he said, but inevitable, like a frog in slowly heating water. Americans wouldn't realize they were being boiled alive until they were already cooked. Does that sound familiar? Does that pattern echo anything you've witnessed in recent years? Titor described a world where trust in institutions had completely collapsed, where people didn't believe anything their government told them, where media was seen as propaganda regardless of which side it came from. He described communities turning inward, relying only on people they knew personally, viewing outsiders with suspicion and hostility. He described a generation growing up knowing nothing but conflict, children who learned to shoot before they learned to read, teenagers who'd never known peace. The world of 2036, in his telling, was quieter than our world. Fewer people, simpler lives, communities based on farming and local manufacturing. No internet as we know it, just isolated networks connecting small groups. No global economy, just regional trade. No federal government with real power, just loose associations of autonomous regions trying to rebuild. He made it sound almost peaceful, almost idyllic in a strange way. But he also made it clear the price of that peace was 3 billion dead. 3 billion people. Think about that number. Think about what it means. Think about everyone you know, everyone you love, everyone whose life touches yours in any way. Now imagine half of them simply gone. Imagine cities turned to glass. Imagine the infrastructure of modern civilization reduced to rubble. Imagine the survivors having to start over from almost nothing, having to relearn skills their grandparents knew, having to build a new world from the ruins of the old one. That's what Titor said was coming. That's what he traveled back in time to remember, to document, to warn us about. And whether you believe he was a time traveler or the most creative hoaxer in internet history, you have to admit, the warning itself is worth considering. Because here's the thing about predictions and warnings. They're only useful if we listen to them. They're only valuable if they change our behavior. And that's where the paradox comes in, the impossible logic of time travel that Titor himself acknowledged. If Titor really was from the future, and if his warnings changed our timeline enough to prevent his predictions from coming true, then he succeeded in his mission. But if he succeeded in changing the timeline, then the future he came from never happens, which means he never travels back in time to warn us, which means we don't change course, which means his future does happen, which means he does travel back. It's a loop, a paradox, the kind of brain-twisting logic that makes physicists wake up screaming. Unless, and this is what Titor argued, the many worlds interpretation is correct, unless every possible outcome creates a new branch of reality, unless his timeline continues to exist separately from ours, unaffected by his warnings, while our timeline diverges based on different choices. In that model, Titor's warnings might have saved our world while his world remains doomed. He's not trying to save his own timeline because he can't. He's trying to save ours because he can. If that's true, if the many worlds interpretation is correct, then somewhere out there in the infinite multiverse, there's a timeline where everything Titor described came true exactly as he said. There's a world where American cities burned in 2015. There's a world where billions died in nuclear fire. There's a world where John Titor, soldier and time traveler, loaded his equipment into a 1987 Chevy truck and drove that machine through a sphere of warped space-time, heading backward through history on a mission to retrieve a computer and visit his childhood self. And maybe, just maybe, there's a world where people listened. Let's talk about the technical aspect again, because the more you dig into what Titor posted, the stranger it gets. He described the sensation of time travel in vivid detail. The preparation period, checking and rechecking the equipment, programming the destination coordinates based on gravitational markers. The moment of activation, when the magnetic field begins to build, when you start to feel the pull of artificial gravity pressing against your body. The formation of the light sphere around the vehicle, like being inside a bubble of pure energy. The way time outside the field appears to accelerate, watching the sun arc across the sky in seconds, days passing like frames in a film strip. He said you could see outside the field but couldn't be seen from outside. To an external observer, the vehicle would simply vanish, disappearing in a flash of light. But from inside, you watch the world age around you, watch buildings rise and fall, watch landscapes change, watch history unfold at impossible speed until you reach your destination and shut down the field. He described the disorientation of arriving in a different time, the way your body takes hours to adjust to the temporal displacement. He talked about the practical difficulties, obtaining period-appropriate money and identification, remembering to speak and act in ways that wouldn't draw attention, dealing with the psychological stress of knowing you don't belong, of knowing that everyone around you thinks it's 2000, but you remember 2036. The level of detail in these descriptions is extraordinary. Either Titor had an incredibly vivid imagination, or he was describing real experiences. There's no middle ground. You can't accidentally create this kind of consistent, detailed narrative. It's either truth or deliberate fiction, and if it's fiction, it's some of the most elaborate and well-executed fiction ever created. But here's where things get even weirder. Titor made several statements about his personal life that, if true, would be verifiable. He said he was born in 1998, somewhere in Florida. He said his grandfather had a house in rural Florida, where the family would gather. He said his father worked on the time travel project. He provided enough details that, if someone wanted to, they could potentially identify who he was talking about. And people tried. After Titor stopped posting in March 2001, investigators attempted to track down his real identity. They analyzed his writing style. They traced his IP addresses. They looked for families in Florida matching his descriptions. They never found definitive proof, but they found enough circumstantial evidence to keep the mystery alive. They found families that roughly matched. They found people who could have been the 2-year-old John Titor of 2000. But none of it was conclusive, and that's exactly what you'd expect if Titor was protecting his identity, protecting his family, protecting his younger self. Or it's exactly what you'd expect if the whole thing was an elaborate hoax designed to be just plausible enough to keep people guessing forever. In 2003, the story took another strange turn. An attorney named Larry Haber announced that he represented the Titor family, that they had physical evidence of John Titor's visit, including documents and items he had left behind. A foundation was created. A book was published. Suddenly, the story that had been a weird internet mystery became something more commercial, something that smelled less like a genuine mystery and more like a money-making scheme. This is the part where many people decided it was definitely a hoax. The commercialization, the copyright claims, the attempt to profit from the story, all of it seemed to undermine the credibility of the original posts. If Titor was real, if he was genuinely trying to warn humanity about his future, why would his family be trying to make money off his message? But defenders of the story had a response. If your family member really did travel through time, if they really did leave you with knowledge and evidence that could prove it, wouldn't you try to protect that information? Wouldn't you try to control the narrative? Wouldn't you want to profit from something that had disrupted your entire life? The commercialization doesn't prove it was fake any more than the original posts prove it was real. It's just another data point in an endless sea of ambiguity. And that's what makes the Titor story so perfect, so enduring, so impossible to fully dismiss or confirm. It exists in that sweet spot of uncertainty where belief becomes a choice, where evidence can be interpreted either way, where your conclusion says more about you than it does about the truth. So let's examine what we actually know, the facts that can't be disputed. Fact 1. Someone calling himself John Titor posted extensively on internet forums between November 2000 and March 2001, claiming to be a time traveler from 2036. Fact 2. This person provided detailed technical schematics and photographs of an alleged time machine, with explanations grounded in real theoretical physics. Fact 3. This person accurately described a hidden feature of the IBM 5100 computer that was not widely known at the time. Fact 4. This person made numerous predictions about the future, some of which were completely wrong, some of which were eerily accurate in theme if not in detail. Fact 5. This person disappeared in March 2001 and has never been definitively identified. Those are the facts. Everything else is interpretation. If you're a skeptic, you look at those facts and see an elaborate hoax. Someone with knowledge of physics and computer history, probably a group of people working together, creating an alternate reality game before ARGs were really a thing. The wrong predictions prove it was fake. The right predictions were either lucky guesses or so vague they could be retconned to fit almost anything. The technical details were impressive, but not impossible for a dedicated hoaxer to compile. The disappearance was just someone getting bored with their game and moving on with their life. If you're a believer, you look at those same facts and see potential evidence of genuine time travel. The technical knowledge seems too detailed to be pure invention. The IBM 5100 information is too obscure to be a lucky guess. The predictions that came true are too specific to be coincidence. The world-line divergence theory explains away the predictions that failed. The disappearance was Titor returning to his own time, his mission complete. And if you're somewhere in the middle, if you're agnostic about the whole thing, you look at those facts and see one of the most fascinating mysteries of the internet age. You see a story that forces you to question your assumptions about time, reality, and the nature of truth itself. You see something that's more interesting as an unsolved mystery than it would be if we had a definitive answer. Here's what I think, and this is just my opinion, just one more voice in a conversation that's been happening for 25 years. I think the truth of the John Titor story is less important than the questions it raises. Whether Titor was a real time traveler or an incredibly creative storyteller, he forced millions of people to think seriously about the future. He made us consider the fragility of our civilization. He made us question whether the path we're on leads somewhere we want to go. He made us think about the consequences of our choices, both personal and societal. He made us wonder if time travel is possible, and if it is, what that means for free will, for causality, for everything we think we understand about the universe. Those questions matter regardless of whether Titor was real. The warnings matter regardless of whether they came from 2036 or from someone's imagination in 2000. Because looking at the world today, looking at the political polarization, the climate crisis, the technological disruption, the social upheaval, the sense that we're accelerating towards something, some kind of breaking point or transformation or collapse. Can anyone honestly say we don't need warnings? Can anyone say we don't need to be thinking about the consequences of the path we're on? Maybe Titor was a hoax. Probably he was a hoax. But he was a hoax that told the truth about the future. Even if he wasn't actually from that future, he was a fiction that revealed reality. And that's more valuable than a dry recitation of facts could ever be. Let me share something with you that I find particularly haunting about the Titor posts. In one of his last messages before disappearing, someone asked him what he would miss most about our time when he returned to 2036. His answer was simple and devastating. He said he'd miss the abundance, the full stores, the variety of food, the sense of safety, the ability to drive down a highway, without checkpoints. The internet with its millions of voices, all talking at once. The lights that never go out. The water that always runs. All the things we take for granted, all the things that seem permanent and unchangeable, all the infrastructure of modern life that we assume will always be there. He said that people in 2036 remember the world before the war the way we remember childhood, as a kind of paradise that can never be reclaimed. They tell stories about restaurants with 100-item menus, about stores open 24 hours a day, about being able to travel anywhere in the world just by buying a ticket. And the children born after the war don't quite believe them. They think the stories are exaggerated, romanticized, like fairy tales about a magical land that never really existed. Whether Titor was real or not, that image stuck with me. The idea that our normal, everyday world might someday be remembered as a lost golden age. The idea that future generations might look back at us with envy, might wish they could experience the abundance and security we complain about. The idea that everything we had could disappear so quickly that within a single generation, it would seem like a myth. And here's the thing. We've seen it happen. We've seen civilizations collapse. We've seen empires fall. We've seen periods of prosperity and peace give way to darkness and chaos. It's happened over and over throughout history. The Romans thought their empire would last forever. The British thought the sun would never set on their domain. Every civilization at its peak believed it was the culmination of human progress, that the good times would never end. They were all wrong. So why should we be different? What makes us think that our civilization is special, that we've somehow transcended the patterns of history, that we're immune to the collapse that's claimed every other society? Is it arrogance? Is it ignorance? Or is it just a human tendency to assume that tomorrow will be like today, that the future will be an extension of the present? Titor's message, whether he was a time traveler or a prophet or just a very creative storyteller, was simple. Don't assume. Don't take anything for granted. Don't think that the trajectory you're on is the only possible trajectory. The future isn't fixed. The future is created by the choices we make, the actions we take, the paths we choose to follow. And that's either the most hopeful message imaginable or the most terrifying, depending on how you look at it. If the future isn't fixed, if we really do have the power to change course, then we also have a responsibility to do so. We can't blame fate or destiny or the inevitable march of history. We have to look at the warnings, whether they come from time travelers or scientists or our own common sense, and decide what we're going to do about them. We have to ask ourselves, do we want to live in Titor's world of 2036? Do we want our children to grow up in the aftermath of collapse? Do we want to be the generation that let it all fall apart? Or do we want to be the generation that changed course, that listened to the warnings, that chose a different path? These aren't rhetorical questions. These are the questions that will define our future, that will determine whether we follow Titor's timeline or create a better one. And we don't have much time to answer them. The window is closing. The trajectory is accelerating. The warnings are getting louder. So what happens next? Where do we go from here with the Titor story? In the years since Titor's posts, the mystery has only deepened. People have analyzed every word he wrote, looking for hidden meanings, secret codes, prophecies that haven't yet been fulfilled. Some claim to have found evidence that Titor was part of a larger time travel program, that there were other travelers who came back with him, or before him, or after him. Others insist that Titor was one person working alone, that the whole thing was a solo operation by someone with too much knowledge and too much time on their hands. The photographs of the time machine have been analyzed frame by frame. Experts have examined the shadows, the reflections, the technical components visible in the images. Some say they show signs of manipulation, evidence that the photos were staged or doctored. Others say the opposite, that the details are too consistent, too technically coherent to be faked with the technology available in 2000. The writing style has been analyzed by linguists and psychologists. They've looked for patterns that might identify the author, for psychological markers that might reveal whether the writer genuinely believed what they were saying or was consciously creating a fiction. The results? Inconclusive. Some analysts think Titor was telling the truth as he understood it. Others think he was a skilled storyteller who never broke character. Nobody has a definitive answer, and maybe that's appropriate. Maybe that's how it should be. Maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, aren't meant to have clean endings with all the loose threads tied up. Maybe the value of the Titor story is precisely in its ambiguity, in the space it creates for speculation and wonder and serious thought about questions that matter. Because at the end of the day, whether John Titor was a time traveler from 2036, a hoaxer from 2000, or something else entirely, the impact of his story is real. The conversations he started are real. The questions he raised are real. The warnings he issued are real, regardless of their source. Millions of people have read his posts. Thousands have spent years analyzing them, debating them, trying to extract meaning from them. The Titor story has influenced science fiction, inspired research into time travel physics, sparked discussions about the future of American society, and forced people to think seriously about topics they might otherwise have ignored. That influence, that impact, can't be faked. It exists independent of whether the original story was true. And here we are, 25 years later, still talking about it, still wondering, still trying to figure out if John Titor was the most elaborate hoax in internet history, or the most important warning humanity ever received. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about this. What would you do if you knew for certain that Titor was real? What would you do if definitive proof emerged tomorrow that time travel is possible, that someone really did come back from 2036, that everything Titor said about the future was accurate for his timeline? Would it change how you live? Would it change your priorities? Would it change how you think about the future? And here's the follow-up question. Why should it matter whether he was real or not? If the warnings are valid, if the trajectory described is one we're actually on, if the future he came from is a future we could potentially create, why does the source of the warning matter? Should we be paying attention either way? Think about it like this. If someone runs into a burning building to warn you about the fire, you don't stop to verify their credentials before evacuating. You don't demand proof that they're a certified fire inspector. You don't stand there arguing about whether they're qualified to issue warnings. You get out of the building. You respond to the danger, not to the messenger. The same logic applies here. We have warnings about political polarization leading to violence. We have warnings about the fragility of our infrastructure. We have warnings about the dangers of sacrificing liberty for security. We have warnings about the potential for catastrophic conflict. These warnings come from many sources: historians, scientists, political analysts, military strategists, and yes, maybe a time traveler from the internet. Does it matter which source we listen to, as long as we're listening? I don't think it does. I think the message matters more than the messenger. I think the warning matters more than the credentials of the person issuing it. I think we need to stop worrying so much about proving or disproving the Titor story and start thinking seriously about the future it describes. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Whether Titor was real or not, we're creating his timeline anyway. We're following the script he laid out, hitting the marks he identified, moving toward the future he described. Maybe not in exactly the way he predicted, maybe not on his exact timetable, but the broad strokes are there. The polarization is there. The erosion of civil liberties is there. The increasing authoritarianism is there. The social breakdown is there. The feeling that we're on a trajectory towards something dark and chaotic and irreversible is there. We're doing it to ourselves. We don't need a time traveler to warn us because we can see it happening in real time. We're living through the early stages of the collapse Titor described. We're the characters in his history books. We're the people he learned about in his timeline. The generation that let it all fall apart. Unless we're not. Unless we make different choices. Unless we change course. And that brings us back to the fundamental paradox at the heart of the Titor story. The question that makes time travel so philosophically interesting and so practically impossible. If we change the future, do we invalidate the warning that made us change it? If we avoid Titor's timeline, does that mean he never came back to warn us? And if he never came back to warn us, how do we know to avoid his timeline? The answer, if Titor was correct about the physics, is world lines, multiple parallel realities, every choice creating a new branch. In one reality, we follow his timeline. In another, we don't. In one reality, he travels back. In another, he doesn't need to. All versions exist simultaneously, each one real to the people living in it. each one true in its own context. If that's correct, if the many worlds interpretation is right, then we're not trying to prevent Titor's future. We're trying to ensure that we're on a world line that diverges from his. We're trying to be one of the timelines that makes different choices, that avoids a trap, that survives. And maybe that's what he was trying to tell us all along. Maybe the point wasn't to predict our specific future. Maybe the point was to show us one possible future, one potential outcome of the choices we're making, one destination we could reach if we stay on our current path. Maybe he was giving us a roadmap of where not to go, a warning sign saying, danger ahead, consider alternate route. If that's the case, then the question isn't whether Titor was real. The question is whether we're paying attention. The question is whether we're going to keep driving toward the cliff edge just because we're not sure if the warning sign was officially authorized. The question is whether we're going to bet our future on the assumption that the warning was fake, or whether we're going to play it safe and change course just in case. I know what I'd choose. I know which bet I'd make. Because even if there's only a 1% chance that Titor was real, even if there's only a 1% chance that we're heading toward the future he described, isn't that enough to warrant taking the warning seriously? Isn't that enough to make us think about the choices we're making, both individually and collectively? Pascal's wager for time travelers. If we act as though Titor was real, and he wasn't, we've wasted some effort on preparation and course correction. If we act as though he was fake and he was real, we've wasted our civilization. The risk-reward calculation seems pretty straightforward. But of course, it's never that simple. Because taking Titor's warning seriously means confronting uncomfortable truths about our society. It means admitting that we're more fragile than we like to think. It means acknowledging that the systems we depend on could fail. It means accepting that the political and social conflicts we're experiencing aren't just temporary annoyances, but potentially existential threats. It means doing the hard work of bridge building and reconciliation, and institutional reform, and all the other difficult, thankless tasks that might prevent collapse. It's easier to dismiss Titor as a hoax. It's easier to laugh off the warnings. It's easier to assume that everything will work out, that someone else will fix the problems, that the future will take care of itself. It's easier to do nothing. But easy isn't the same as right. Easy isn't the same as wise. Easy isn't the same as safe. So where does that leave us? Where does the John Titor story end? It doesn't. That's the point. The story doesn't end because we're still living it. We're still writing it. Every choice we make, every action we take, every decision we collectively arrive at as a society, all of it determines whether we move toward Titor's timeline or away from it. All of it determines whether his warnings become our reality or just an interesting story we tell about that weird time traveler from the internet. The ending hasn't been written yet. We're writing it now. We're the ones with the power to decide how this story ends. And maybe that's the real message John Titor left us. Not predictions about civil wars and nuclear exchanges. Not technical schematics of time machines. Not proof of time travel or world lines or parallel realities. Just a simple reminder that the future isn't fixed. That we have choices. That we have power. That we can change course if we decide to. Whether he was from 2036 or just from someone's imagination, that message is worth hearing. That warning is worth heeding. That story is worth remembering. Because 25 years ago, someone took the time to warn us. Someone posted thousands of words trying to make us understand that the path we're on leads somewhere dark. Someone tried to show us that the future is not inevitable, that we can make different choices, that we can create a different outcome. We didn't listen. We laughed it off. We called it a hoax and moved on with our lives. And here we are, a quarter century later, living through the early stages of exactly what we were warned about. So maybe it's time to start listening. Maybe it's time to take the warnings seriously, regardless of their source. Maybe it's time to stop arguing about whether the messenger was real and start paying attention to the message. Because if John Titor was right about anything, it's this. The future is created by the choices we make today, and we're running out of time to make better ones. The clock is ticking. The warnings have been issued. The trajectory has been laid out. What happens next is up to us. What happens next is our choice. What happens next will determine whether John Titor's timeline becomes our reality or just a cautionary tale we avoided by listening to someone who cared enough to warn us. So I'll ask you one more time. What year are you watching this from? And more importantly, what kind of future do you want to create? Drop your answers in the comments. Let's start a conversation. Let's talk about where we're going and whether we want to get there. Let's decide together whether John Titor's warnings haunt us or save us. Because 25 years from now, when someone makes a video about the state of the world in 2050, I want them to say that we listened. I want them to say that we changed course. I want them to say that we took the warnings seriously and made different choices. I want them to say that we learned from John Titor whether he was real or not. The story isn't over. The warning still stands. The choice is still ours. What are we going to do about it?